how do we measure change over time with this question? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. So the way in which I might start to consider how the change over time component might come about is through thinking about when do I start looking at the question, and when do I stop looking at the question, and what specifically am I measuring with regards to change. So the question is asking before the later 18th century and after the later 18th century. So it's almost like there's two parts of the question, right? The first part of the question could start from whenever, really. So I think you could even start from example like late antiquity from the Roman period as well, and start to think about whether economic growth was actually really so rare before the later 18th century, whether there's moments where economic growth happens, but perhaps in 300 years before the later 18th century, it doesn't occur. And then also you could ask yourself, why is the later 18th century such a hinge point with this question? And is it something that you actually agree with? Do you believe that the later 18th century is a hinge point, for example, for one area of the world, because there's a huge change over time, here, where, economic growth is stagnant, but then suddenly it shoots up in the later 18th century? Or are there other parts of the world for which actually economic growth has consistently been growing before the later 18th century? Or are there other parts of the world in which economic growth actually goes down after the later 18th century? So there's actually two change over time elements that we need to think of: stagnation and actual, and whether the later 18th century produced a significant change over time component to the question.